Oh, we're live. Yeah.
Welcome everyone to Waking the Red Weekly, presented by Footy Talks. Every Tuesday, provided this MLS back tournament continues at least somewhat on schedule. We'll be here on Zoom, on Facebook Live, as well as wakingthered.com. You can join the Zoom chat to ask us questions, etc., interact with us. And, we're just really looking forward to finally talking all things Toronto FC. MLS is back, and seeing Canadian soccer as large or at large as well. We have a couple exciting guests coming up, but first, before we get to that, on our MLS is Back preview episode, I wanted to introduce my co-hosts for this show. Let's start with Jeff Nesker, and I can't fault the kit because it's absolutely beautiful, vintage Arsenal kit there. But considering the shirt I'm wearing in the game a bit later today, I'm not super excited to see him wearing that. But how are you doing, Jeff?
Well, I'm wearing this shirt in solidarity with friend of WTR and brother from another gunner, Frank Fiumara. Damn, I practiced that a bunch of times. Anyway, we're going to beat you, and David Luiz is going to score a brace, and it's going to be excellent. So just prepare yourself.
I think one of those two things is possible, and I think we all know which one of those two. But Michael, how are you doing? I guess probably in relation to that game, you'll be begrudgingly cheering for Arsenal, considering the implications for your Manchester United.
Hey, glory, glory. Yeah, I don't know how I'm supposed to follow up Jeff's intro, but Mitch, I'm happy to be here, and I can't wait to talk some TFC, man.
Yeah, absolutely, and as excited as we are to talk Toronto FC, I don't think we can really do that justice without acknowledging that really the biggest story at this MLS is back tournament so far, and that's the COVID-19 pandemic and all of the issues that has created so far. We're pretty excited with our first guest for this show, which is Dr. Tej Sahota. We'll have him on momentarily here, but I guess, guys, just your general feeling so far is, the tournament's tomorrow, and almost everything about this competition is up in the air, isn't it, Michael?
Yeah, no, for sure. We don't know what's going to happen. And I feel like things are changing by the minute. We'll keep a tab on TFC, who's supposed to kick off on Friday against DC United. But yeah, like I said, things are changing by the minute, but we'll keep you updated for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. The latest news. Carlos Vela won't be there. FC Dallas won't be there. What are you thinking at this moment?
I also read that Freddie Montero pulled out as well, and he's not going to be there for family reasons. I think he actually left the bubble to attend to family reasons, and it was a difficult decision. Yeah, my thumb is red from hitting the refresh button because, like Michael was saying, the news changes constantly, and it's not all very good. So it's been an interesting kind of white knuckle ride watching this thing manifest.
Well, let's talk to the expert here. Let's bring on Dr. Tej, if you wouldn't mind, Kevin. There he is. Welcome,
There
Tej.
he is.
Hey guys, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well, Tej. We're pretty excited to have Dr. Tej Sahota on the show. Of course, Awaken the Red writer, but also a doctor of podiatric medicine, master's in public health, specialization in epidemiology. Worked for the Brampton Beast, worked for the Pan Am Games, Cleveland Cavaliers, as well as an intern. Tej, I miss anything there? I've been practicing saying podiatric and epidemiology all day in the mirror, so I hope I did it justice. But how you doing, Tej?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good.
Yeah, obviously great to have you on. And, obviously we would have wished we could talk more soccer with you, but, given the circumstances, certainly we thought it was important to have this conversation. I actually wanted to start with a question, it is related to COVID-19, but somewhat unrelated in the sense that, there are some other big medical concerns of this tournament. We've talked about the heat. And we've also talked about kind of the inactivity of the players. Obviously, they've been training and playing some inter-squad matches, but that doesn't necessarily make up for the usual, preseason process that they would have gone through. What are some of the injury concerns maybe and some of the things that medical staffs have to worry about in that regard?
Well, typically when we talk about like sports injuries, Mitch, there's the two types. There's the traumatic, the more collision one, right? Two guys going after a ball and they lock knees together and someone tears their MCL or their ACL or just, has a strain. And the other ones, we call them the stress fatigue injuries, the ones that are an accumulation elastic muscle kind of becoming fatigued and losing its stretch function. And that's probably the more higher concern that you're going to see. And that's just simply for a matter of, we always hear players talk about you can practice until the cows come home, but game speed is a completely different thing. So, well, unless you're Toronto FC, which apparently, go through a gauntlet each week in practice. No, so that's probably what's going to happen more is you're going to see a little bit more fatigue injuries. And related to that is just playing in the heat, even if it's 9 a.m. I've been to Orlando, and getting first thing in the morning isn't exactly comfortable weather either. So you're going to see a lot more dehydration meaning that the muscles are quicker to strain, quicker to go fatigue. And, players pulling up lame. You're going to see that a little bit more, guys running down the side and just kind of pulling up lame. And I understand that there's going to be hydration breaks. And I understand that there's going to be, 5 substitutions, but that still means that there's 6 guys on the pitch who are not going to get a chance to sub out for the game. And the hydration breaks are, the amount of water that they lose and the amount of water you can replace in those 30 seconds is it's not equivalent. And more importantly, it's the electrolytes that they're going to be losing, which are going to be causing that muscular contracture. So expect a lot of those stress fatigue injuries, the lame calf pull, the hamstring pull, the quad pull, stuff like that. You're going to expect a lot more of that during this tournament.
Excellent. Tej, I got to compliment you on your scrub Henley combo once again. You're looking pretty sharp. I got a question. Oh, no worries. I got a question for you. The big news yesterday was concerning FC Dallas pulling out of the tournament. What are your thoughts on that generally or specifically?
It's worrisome because this is a team that tested negative when they left Dallas or when they left their training facility. They enter into Orlando, and then the positive tests start, going off the radar. So you can only assume that there was an outbreak or they've come into somebody positive inside the bubble. And so that's concerning because that's the integrity of your bubble is compromised. And we all knew that would be, all right. The minute MLS announced that they were going to not be testing the restaurant workers, the caterers, the cleaners, the day-to-day staff who's going to be coming in and out of the bubble, you're compromising the integrity of your bubble with every single person that leaves. And so whoever was bringing the catering to the Dallas hotel or was cleaning the Dallas hotel, somewhere along the way, they were probably infected and now that spread. So your bubble essentially becomes a community spread, and that's worrisome. So I think they did the right thing. I think Dallas, people shouldn't be looking at FC Dallas now as, they've disrupted the integrity of the tournament by pulling out. I think they really should be lauded for saying, listen, we're going to do the safest thing for the other X amount of teams that are here, and we are going to just pull out and try to remove ourselves from the equation. So, hats off to them for taking that decision, actually, Jeff.
Yeah, you make some good points there, Jeff. It's just going to be worrisome, with TFC going into that bubble. We don't know what's going to happen. But I actually just want to shift directions a little bit and talk a little bit about Achara. And I want to know what you made of the Achara injury. Do you think perhaps the layoff played a factor in this? I'm not sure if you heard, but Omar Gonzalez and him were attacking the far post. And it seems like the two got tangled up and Gonzalez apparently landed on top of Achara. I wanted to gather your thoughts on that. Yeah.
I think we can rule that out as being kind of just a unfortunate set of circumstances. An ACL injury wouldn't be, while a ligament is elastic, something like the ACL would probably, just regular running, just regular treadmill, or for in Jeff's case, the air bike would keep it, would keep it in shape. So I don't think that the layoff would have necessarily exasperated the chances or made it more likely to occur. That's probably just a freak circumstance occurrence.
Mm-hmm. And just building off that a little bit, how do you see him bouncing back? I know he was kind of injury prone in college and university. Do you think this kind of linger with him the rest of his career? Or do you think he can fully recover from it?
For a sport that's you can kind of be on a running pace and then kind of go from there, breakout speed, I think he'll be fine. We worry more about ACL injuries for kind of really explosive activities. 100-meter dash, a sprinter who tears his ACL, he's probably going to have trouble getting out of the gates. Achara may notice a minimal style in change for his play, But I think with today's medicine, the way that they'll be able to reconstruct it and graft it, and he's so young, right? So, and we can't discount how important that is. If this happens to Josie or Michael Bradley, we're starting to sing, we're starting to talk about what's the next phase of their career. Should they move into coaching? But with Achara, even if he takes the 12 months, 16 months, this is probably somebody who can come back to, very close to full strength, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. If you do have any questions for Dr. Tej, you can put them in the chat, and we'll try and make time for at least a couple audience questions. But I wanted to ask overall, Tej, what are some of the lessons that other leagues can learn from some of MLS's faux pas? I mean, we know the NBA is going to be in the same spot. Later this month, the NHL is trying to return, and of course even MLS, they're trying to play out at least part of the season after this, not in a bubble, but hopefully at home venues. So what are some of the lessons that can be learned from this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I never thought I would say this 2 months ago, but the NHL is the one who's doing this right now. The one in Edmonton and Toronto. Test everybody in the bubble. You have to test everybody in the bubble. The problem with the MLS and the NBA plan right away was the fact that they were going to test players, trainers, coaches, but then not test the day-to-day workers. And, I can't harp on this enough. Your bubble is only as secure as the weakest point. And so if you have hotel workers, restaurant workers, caterers, delivery people coming in and out of the bubble each day, going back to the Orlando community, which is, one of the worst hard-hit communities in the world. Florida's topping in at 12,000 cases a day now. You have to assume that they're going into the general public. They're going to Trader Joe's, they're going to the Cheesecake Factory, and they're going to be mixing with other people that are infected. And the very next day, they're coming back to bring Michael Bradley and Josie Altidore their meal, or to clean the bed sheets, so whatever it is. So that right there, the plan was flawed. If other leagues are going to try to take something from this, which the NHL is doing, and the NBA still has a chance, and MLS still has a chance, is everybody needs to be tested. Everybody who's going to be entering in that bubble would have to be tested, and either you sequester somebody into the bubble for a 48-hour period and say, so when you're in, we will test you. You'll get to work on the second day after your test has been negative. But they got to find a different way to do it. Having people go in and out is not going to work for any league.
We do have an audience question here, and this is probably a difficult one to answer, but the question is, why Orlando, which I think is on a lot of people's minds right now.
I've spent a lot of time thinking about that. Jeff, if you remember, I think I tweeted this like April, right? I said, I'm still going to claim partial credit for this whole idea. The World Cup tournament style in Orlando is, I think at that point, Orlando's numbers looked better. You have a ready-made facility. There's a certain sexiness to Orlando, Florida, that there isn't in Des Moines, Iowa. And I think a lot of that has to do with the idea is that you have a ready-made facility with the ESPN Sports Complex, and very important, and I think that shouldn't be lost, is a ready-made TV facility, right? So you can post-production your games. You can have the idea of kind of having a virtual studio there. You can bring in Taylor Twellman and the other ESPN guys and kind of have your roundtable studio and wrap everything nicely up. The TV studios probably played a huge part in that. Now, in retrospect, in hindsight, yeah, Orlando doesn't look good. They'd be much better off going to Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, like the CPL is proposing. So I think it's too late, though. I think they're through the looking glass on that one. But if they could do it all over again, they could probably pick a quiet locale somewhere in, Midwestern America.
Mm. Yeah, it must also be said that ESPN is one of the top purchasers of the rights to MLS games, in the before times. So they obviously had a vested interest in using their facilities towards furthering the tournament. I got a question for you, Tej. The plan is, and again, these plans are pretty ephemeral, but the plan is that MLS is going to try and play out the rest of the season after this tournament is over. In your professional medical Tej opinion, what are the biggest challenges to that? And are there advantages of that versus a bubble to play out the season in home markets without fans as like the EPL does and Bundesliga, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. The Bundesliga, they need to be held separately because everything I've read and do it, they've done it so efficiently. Their bubble is they almost have a traveling bubble that's self-contained within there. It sounds almost hard to imagine, but the group travels as a whole. They travel sequestered, and what I mean by the production and the league officials. Could you do a travel to travel? It almost makes it harder because certain cities and certain states are going to have separate rules. So can you 14-day quarantine in each city that you arrive in? No, you can't play a game every 3 weeks. That's what, Jeff, that's probably going to be the most difficult as far as probably from a health perspective, what you're asking. I think it depends, because some cities, sure, it'd be much safer to travel to Chicago as opposed to traveling to Miami. The minute you touch down in Dade County, you're probably going to get infected now. So it varies. I'd much rather be Toronto FC traveling to Vancouver than traveling back to Miami. And so it's going to be, you're only as safe as the city's numbers that you're going to be traveling to. So so some days the risk is going to be mitigated to being very low, and some days the risk is going to be through the roof. And I think where Bundesliga differs is that Germany waited until they had a nationwide control and could have kind of like a national plan of attack. Each city bought on board. With the United States, it's too up in the air. Some cities are doing a very good job of trying to keep a lid on this and testing, and other governors have not done so. And, so that leads to being a problem.
Yeah, and the distances are also prohibitive too. I mean, Germany is not as big as North America, right? So, we're talking about bus trips versus chartered flights,
sure,
and all the stuff that goes along with that. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, you can charter a bullet train, or and rent out a single individual train, I guess, traveling from the furthest two towns in Germany, as opposed to a 6-hour flight and the layovers, and MLS can't travel chartered flights, so it's going to be commercial flights from commercial airports traveling with the other, commercial passengers in there. So your risk is too high almost in North America.
Yeah, it sounds dicey, that's for sure. Absolutely.
I feel like they'll have a good blueprint with the MLB coming back if they're going to start their season. So I think they're traveling from, I guess, city to city, and even Toronto Blue Jays might even host some games at home. So those games are being played outside as well. So we'll see. I mean,
there's some more problems arising though with the Toronto Blue Jays bubble too. So I'd hope that MLS doesn't look at that. I don't know if you guys saw the news. Chris Bryant of the Chicago Cubs said, they were told they were going to be tested daily. It was 5 days between tests at one point. Some of the players on the California Angels or the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim had to administer their own tests. The testers never came. The kits were there, but the tests never came. So now the players are administering their own tests. And MLB is up. I don't know if they're going to pass their test. And I'm sure the Canadian government's going to be watching the training camp here in Toronto very closely. If you start noticing players are testing positive, they'll probably quash that real quickly.
Well, Dr. Tej, you haven't really done us any favors in terms of our ratings in Des Moines, Iowa, but otherwise, I think this was a great conversation. Really enjoyed it and learned a lot. And as we said, I think a pretty important topic to talk about before we even get into anything soccer related, because this is probably the biggest concern and the biggest story coming out of this tournament. So thanks again, Tej. Really appreciate it.
I don't want to come across too pessimistic. I'm rooting for them. I hope they get this right. I need something to watch once me, Michael, and Martin can enjoy Man United making their Champions League run. But we need to move on to something else. So I hope that Toronto FC and MLS can figure this out. I'm rooting for them. I would just be very, very cautious about if they can pull this off successfully, and we'll go from there.
Awesome. Thanks, Tej. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Tej. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, gentlemen. All the best. Thank you. See you soon.
Well, we have a couple of minutes here where we can make time for some audience questions if anyone has further questions, Toronto FC related or otherwise. But I guess we'll start with you, Michael. Just some thoughts on what Tej had to say, and I guess just the wild times we live in right now in terms of trying to get sports up and running.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at Toronto FC's tweet yesterday that they're departing on the plane, and then you hear FC Dallas is pulling out of the bubble. Toronto FC players are traveling to that bubble. What is going through their mindset when they hear something like this? What kind of mental toll do the players kind of take on from having to go through all of this? Yeah, it's really humbling to, I'm thankful that I'm here, covering the game away from all of this, but, they're doing this for us and I'm grateful.
Yeah, yeah. It's a very good point, Michael. The emotional toll must be, I mean, there's no way to insulate yourself from the back and forth, and they've got to be feeling all of this pressure coming from all angles and all sides. Yeah. Uh, it boggles the mind, but I mean, this is the new normal. We're all putting up with things that we haven't had to deal with before, and just sort of feeling our way through in the dark. So it is what it is.
2020, man. 2020.
Yeah. 2020, man, goodness. We
Yeah,
got
absolutely.
we
do have
got a Josie
couple of-
question. Yeah.
Oh, there we go. What is Josie's status for Friday, and why did he not come up to Toronto when the rest of the team did? Michael, you want to?
Yeah, I can take that one for sure. Josie Altidore I actually have an article in moments away from publishing, but Josie Altidore will actually not be ready for Toronto FC's first game, according to head coach Greg Vanney. He says that it would actually be a lot for Josie Altidore to be ready because he was given permission early in training, early in this pandemic to, stay in his home state of Florida, ironically, and, train individually without the team. And he actually rejoined the team on June 23rd, and per federal quarantine regulations, he had to isolate himself for 14 days, meaning his first, actual training session with Toronto FC wasn't until July 3rd. So that gives him about a week, to get ready for the tournament. And we heard before the start of the year that they were going to kind of take it cautious with Josie. We heard the word load management get thrown around a bunch. So with about a week to prepare for the first game, Greg Vanney's just not going to risk it with Josie, and he's going to take his time and make sure his striker's fit.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that covers it very well. Benedict has a question as well. What do you guys think this means for international football? With quarantine periods required in many countries, international games seem unlikely. I think that's a good point. I think it might be a while before we see international football return to certainly what it was. Obviously, they're going to have to come up with some kind of qualifying scheme at some point for the number of tournaments coming up and figure all of that out. But there's so many factors there. You have players coming from all over the world to play for any given national team. So that on its own makes this incredibly complicated, doesn't it, Jeff?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I looked at that question and my eyes started glazing over because the myriad complexities of doing that in these times just seems like a failure to launch. Like I don't see it happening. I mean, I think the future for international competitions is very similar to what we're seeing with MLS's back, where there would be a bubble, for lack of a better word, and it would be played in a neutral ground and everybody would travel there. I just can't see it happening otherwise.
Yeah, you'd have to think that will be the way things proceed with that. The other question we got was, keep reading that Toronto FC are favorites. Is it anyone's tournament or do the regular stats apply? I think it's pretty wide open here. I mean, as a result of that, I didn't ask us to make any predictions for this show. And, I think the one factor, and we'll maybe talk about this a bit later as well, but the one factor that I think could be very important in this is managers and players who have tournament experience, because this is a tournament that's very much like a World Cup. So you look at like Bruce Arena, someone like that, someone who's led a team through a tournament before. I mean, it's such a unique set of circumstances and so many different factors in terms of all being together at once that I think any player and any coach who has done that before and has done that before at a high level, I think will have some sort of advantage. So that's one factor I'd be looking at. But again, it's pretty tough to pick anything at the moment.
I think one of the things you also have to remember is these are also regular season games, and overall big picture, some of these managers might not be going for the MLS is back tournament title. They're thinking longer picture. They're thinking regular season. I know Greg Vanney in particular, he mentioned that, and I think it shows in his first match with, sitting out Josie possibly, that they're in this for the long run. And again, the first three games count towards the regular season. So a lot of this is going to be regular season action almost.
Yeah, that's another, pretty interesting wrinkle in this is the fact that all the group games are incredibly important as well. We do have a second guest who will be joining us momentarily here, Oliver Platt. So again, if you guys have any questions in the chat for Ollie, you can absolutely feel free to put those there. Looks like he's just joining us momentarily here, but
I wanted to just say that there's a lot of new coaches in MLS. Diego Alonso comes to mind, who made their career as tournament managers. So this seems to be like a perfect coming out party for coaches of that, cough, cough, yap, stam. Like we'll see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely we will. And we are now joined by Ollie Platt from OneSoccer, and of course, a former Waking the Red managing editor. So great to have you on, Ollie.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Not too bad,
Ollie,
not too
thanks
bad.
for having us.
Yeah, great to see you all.
Thanks for having me
So
on.
we've talked with Dr. Tej a bunch about all of the coronavirus concerns. So we'll probably talk a little more actual soccer with you at this point. But what I wanted to ask first off is, for Toronto FC going into this tournament, what for you is maybe the biggest question mark about this side going in?
I think it's got to be Josie, right? Like we saw last season that this team kind of hit upon something down the stretch, played really well in some tough places, and then obviously made that run, albeit with a bit of fortune through the playoffs to the final. But what was missing throughout that was, although they could control games and although the defense definitely improved on where it had been, they lacked weapons up front. So, and a big part of that was Josie's inconsistent availability. So with him coming into this tournament, having not really trained, we know that's not really a recipe for success with Josie, given the issues he's had in the past with the games coming thick and fast as well. You just wonder how much of a role he's going to play. And I think probably Toronto's hopes in this tournament rest on how much he can play and how effectively he can play, right?
Yeah, certainly. We actually have an audience question that kind of relates to that and that's who will play in Josie's spot on Friday. I guess there's probably a number of options, but who would you go with, Ollie?
I heard from one of my old colleagues on the TFCB that Achara was maybe an option there, and then obviously he got his injury. So I quite like it when they play Pozuelo up there, and a couple of wingers either side of him, and I think that allows you to get Delgado, Bradley, and Osorio in the midfield as well. So I wouldn't mind seeing that. Patrick Mullins, I think he's a decent player, but he's not really going to move the needle a ton for you. So I'd probably go Pozuelo.
That's a good answer. That's a good answer. Ollie, I wanted to ask you, who are you most looking forward to, in this MLS tournament, maybe from a TFC perspective? Who should fans look out for?
Good question. I'd say it's got to be Piatti, right? The guy we haven't seen yet. I think you can ask some questions around that signing. It does seem like they took a player who's maybe a little on the lower end cost-wise, but and maybe won't. He maybe isn't going to have years at TFC or have any real resale value going forwards. But I do think he's a quality player and he should be a big impact player in MLS. And adding to the interest is that it seems like he's usually been a left winger in his career. It seems like TFC are going to try him on the right, which is going to be interesting as well. So he's kind of the top flight winger that Vanny's been waiting for so long, right? And I'll be interested to see how he gets on and what kind of shape he's in.
For sure.
Amazing. I'm going to go macro here, Ollie, because I've wanted to ask you this question for a very long time. Us at Waking the Red, we've very much enjoyed your meteoric rise from lowercase J blogger to national television pundit. What's been the most eye-opening experience?
Probably, to be honest, every aspect of coming to OneSoccer has been pretty eye-opening. I had no experience of even working in television, not least actually being on screen. So just seeing the amount of work that goes into a broadcast, the costs associated, the amount of staff required just to broadcast a soccer game, right, on a very basic level. That was really eye-opening, and it shows you how difficult it is to get something off the ground, right? So luckily we have amazing backing in a huge company in Media Pro that's going to give us hopefully a few years to get going and that kind of safety net. But yeah, I think it's just the scale of it. Of
We just,
you know,
nope.
yeah, just the demands of putting a soccer game on.
Yeah, certainly. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the DFB-Pokal Final, which of course was on OneSoccer. You know, and a little bit about Alfonso Davies. You know, another 2 trophies this year. Obviously, a massive season for him. How critical is that? You know, a player playing at that high a level, and certainly with you know what he's been able to accomplish. How critical is that for the reputation of Canadians across global soccer right now? That there's a player you can point to, a player that came for reasonably, I mean, certainly expensive for a Canadian player, but reasonably cheap from an unknown league, and now, you know, is playing incredibly well at one of the best clubs in the world.
Yeah, it's massive, and there's been this shift in perception of Canada, I think, over the past year or two, and people all over the world are starting to see it as a place where you can find some rough diamonds for not a lot of money. And that's kind of happened. I think that's been happening in the States a bit for the past few years with guys like Tyler Adams and Weston McKennie, and I think now it's coming to Canada. You know, you just see clubs. You look even at one that's a lot smaller than Davies, but the Emilio Estevez transfer. This is a kid who didn't even really play in the CPL last year. You know, he had quite limited minutes, but there's something there. There's, you know, quite a lot of raw potential there, very raw, but there is potential. And a team in Holland takes a gamble on him, right? So I think you're starting to see more and more agents, clubs, whatever it is, over the world who are looking at Canada and thinking, you know, no one's really looked here, and there's some talent that might be up for grabs if we're the first to get it.
Yeah, just sort of building off that, Ollie. You mentioned, you know, Emilio Estevez there. Us, you know, Canadians here at home, we know Alfonso Davies, Jonathan David. Who's next? Who else are we going to be talking about?
Next. That's a very good question.
Put you on the spot a little bit there. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I think there's a few guys in the CPL I like. The one I really like, just because he is still pretty young and has already played, you know, a very important role for his team, is Deardy Nabsy at York 9. I think he could go a long way. And then you look at the MLS academies as well. You know, TFC. You know, you kind of need to believe it to see it with TFC, because we've said before that they have a good generation of players coming through, and it hasn't always panned out. But I really think, you know, Jaden Nelson, Shaquille Marshall-Rutty, Nobo Akello, these kids have big talent, a lot of talent, and it's just a case of realizing it and, you know, putting it into practice on the field, right? So I hope they get the opportunities and maybe even in this tournament to show what they can do.
It's another good answer.
You can still hear me, right? I had a technical difficulty, but my mic's still working?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. All right, it's my turn. Ollie, in your opinion, what is priority 1 for the Canadian Premier League moving forward? And then I'll have a follow-up to that.
Good question. I would say further expansion. I think we need more teams. We certainly need to be in Quebec. That's the big one, right? And I think there's probably a lot of untapped potential in Quebec in terms of soccer interest and passion for the game there. So yeah, I'd like to see, obviously the goal is quite considerable expansion up until the 2026 World Cup, and the pandemic has thrown a bit of a wrench into that. So I think, you know, being able to continue to expand the league, finding interested ownership groups, that's only got more challenging because of what's happened this year. So I'd say that has to be a big priority and is going to be even tougher than it would have been. But, you know, there seems to still be some good interest out there.
Well, my follow-up is, what do you think the league did right year 1? And was there anything you think they did wrong?
Did right, I would say the biggest success story was the players, right, and the teams. Some of the teams really impressed me with the way they were run. The coaching level was really good, I think. I think there's, you know, as much as we talk about players, there's some really talented coaches in the league as well. And yeah, I think a lot of us expected that the league would recruit some veteran international players, and they might stand out quite a bit in the first season, just in terms of the level of play. But it was actually the opposite. The international players were a bit of an issue and maybe not quite up to the level we hoped. And it was the young Canadians who really starred. So that was surprising and really pleasantly surprising. And that kind of leads me into a natural, you know, what could be better, which is the level of the international players. And we know that, you know, the league has put a lot of thought into that. They've partnered with 21st Club, an analytics consultancy, to improve their scouting internationally and hopefully those players as long as they can get into the country once the pandemic has kind of eased off a bit. Hopefully those players will be at a different level to the ones we saw last year.
So we have a couple of audience questions here. The first one here is we've seen the impact that the 5 subs can make in the English Premier League to change games late. Do you think we'll see this in this tournament? And is this a tactic maybe that Toronto FC could use with someone like Josie?
Yeah, it could be, right. If you can get Josie out there for the first 45 or 60 and then rest him, you may be able to use him more in the next game. I think that's going to be a big part of it, is squad depth, and that probably in some ways plays in TFC's favour, because I think they do have good depth. In other ways it maybe doesn't, because they are an older team and maybe not quite as durable as other teams around the league. But for sure, I think, that they'll make use of those subs in the way we've seen in England.
And another question here, kind of flipping Michael's question around, is there a Canadian veteran that you think might be on his way home soon?
On his way home? We had Junior Hoylett on one of our shows recently, and he was talking about his hopes of coming home to Toronto one day. So that'd be a good one. Certainly we know they've been in the market for wingers, so he'd be quite a nice fit. Aside from him, can't think of many that are coming to mind right now. I think, obviously people talk about Atiba, but he just keeps going, keeps re-signing those 1-year deals in Turkey and never seems to drop his level. Maybe Junior Hoylett at some point.
Yeah, I think Atiba hit his 200th game with Besiktas recently, and he still seems to be going strong. I think I read another article that said they did physical testing on him, and he was in his early 20s, which I think makes a lot of sense to anyone who's watched any sort of Atiba Hutchinson games. But unless there's any other audience questions, which I don't think there are at the moment, Ollie, thank you so much. Jeff has a question.
Yeah, no, there's 2 here.
Okay.
One on Oliver. You mentioned that scoring could be an issue for TFC. Are there any rumors in the ephemera or that who they may be targeting towards the next window?
That's one for you guys. I'm not on the TFC beat anymore. I don't know. It seems unlikely that teams are going to add at this point, just because of all the insecurity around. But yeah, as I say, I'm not. I don't have the information anymore on that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Then this one is probably just going to be as fun. Do you think Josie's time with TFC is ending?
Good question. Personally, I thought that contract was strange when they gave it to him. I think it was shortly after Vazquez and Giovinco had left, right? And so there was a note of, we want to get someone tied down, and we don't want to have a complete exodus of all these legendary players. But we knew that he wasn't getting any younger. We knew that his injury problems were there, and I thought it was an odd decision at the time to extend him and give him a pay rise. And that contract, I would imagine, would make him quite difficult to move, as good a player as he is. So I think he'll probably see it out. I think if you're a TFC fan, you have to hope that, he gets healthy and he can return to being the Josie we know that he can be.
Fair point.
Well, it does seem like it wouldn't be a TFC discussion without some sort of question about Josie Altidor's future. So I'm glad we were able to get that one in. But Ollie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Anytime. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ollie.
Great to see you, man.
And just before we go here, guys, I had a couple of rapid fire Toronto FC questions. I think you're working maybe on a piece on this, Michael. So I'll ask you the first one, which is, which young player do you think could make the biggest impact for Toronto FC at this tournament?
Yeah, that's a tough one. That depends what you define as young player. Yeah, the one I'm working on is kind of like a U22 piece. So Liam Fraser, believe it or not, still kind of qualifies under that build. I'm excited to see Jaden Nelson and Jaquil Marshall in the team, mostly because we haven't yet, right? We haven't really seen them against any sort of competition that's close to like the professional level. We've seen them play against USL players, but there aren't any men really in that league. So we'll see how these guys sort of line up against men and see how they kind of find their own sort of rhythm within the game if they do kind of get their spotlight.
Yeah, certainly. All signs have been positive coming out of Toronto FC camp in regards to that. Vanny saying he's been pretty happy with the way a lot of his young players have returned from this quarantine period. So that is a good sign in itself. Jeff, for you, who's the biggest competition for Toronto FC within their group?
It's got to be Montreal. It has to be the Impact. You don't think so?
I go back to New England. Just I think they have a lot of quality players, and again, the Bruce Arena factor. I think that makes a big difference.
True.
But again, we to your point, Montreal has probably played the most games together so far, and the most important games. So from that perspective, I think it's going to be a difficult group. I mean, there's no really bad team in this group. Everybody's pretty decent. I would still say for me, Toronto FC is the favorite, but certainly it's going to be tricky.
You guys are looking
Michael,
at this both wrong, just so you know.
All right, go ahead. I like that.
Only competition for TFC really is going to be Seattle Sounders when they inevitably meet up in the finals. Come on.
Of course. Yeah, fair enough.
Come on, it's already written.
True enough.
That is a great point. Michael, which is more important, maximum points in group games or winning the tournament?
Wow. That's a tough one, you know. If you go on and win the tournament, you automatically get that CONCACAF Champions League spot.
Mm-hmm.
And we know how much we want that spot as, you know, a TFC fan base. But at the same time, winning the league has to be the priority, does it not? When we look around to any other league in the world, most of the time, like they're going for that domestic title. And, you know, the Champions League kind of comes second unless you are the Bayern Munichs or the Real Madrids who've won, you know, automatic, or not Real Madrid, but Bayern Munich who automatically win their league every year.
Yeah, Juve.
Yeah, Juve too, exactly. So I don't think TFC's at that stage quite yet. So I think their focus has to remain on the group stage. And I think, you know, getting those maximum group stage points are probably the most important right now.
I don't know. I mean,
sorry,
are we going to have a regular season? You know, so much is up in the air. I think to the bird in the hand for two in the bush, it doesn't apply. You know, we're playing games. I think they have to be important now because who knows what happens after this tournament goes or doesn't go. You know, we were joking less than an hour ago that it might be Inter Miami versus Orlando and then done. So, you know, I think you got to go for this one if you're there. I mean, otherwise, what's the point? And the future is not written in stone at all. This is a moving target.
Yeah, certainly. I think so many things related to this MLS's back tournament seem to be changing every day. So hopefully not everything we've said on today's show is ancient history by the time all of you guys listen to this, you know, if you didn't watch live. But, you know, we really appreciate everyone who asked questions. We appreciate everyone who interacted with us. Of course, Dr. Tej for coming on. Oliver as well. That was some great chats, and of course Kevin for putting all of this together. We're really excited to do this and you know, continue going forward. Just before we go, if you want to keep up the soccer again, certainly we'll be making a day of this in terms of soccer. As you know, at 3:15 there's a certain big match that will be going on, but later on in the day, 7:30, Ben Fisk of Atletico Ottawa will be joining Carlos Verdi and Michael DeLuca on the La Liga show they have here at Footy Talk. So you're not going to want to miss that, an opportunity to ask him some questions about the Canadian Premier League's newest side, and obviously a pretty exciting side for Canadian soccer in general. And our next show, again, provided everything stays at least somewhat on track, will be Tuesday, July 4th. Until then, you know, hopefully we'll have some Toronto FC action to watch and talk about at that point. But again, thank you everyone for interacting, and you can follow along with Waking the Red for all of your coverage throughout this MLS's back tournament. And of course, as I said, Footy Talks will have a bunch of shows to keep you going as well. So have a great week, everyone.
Episode 1's in the books, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.